Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have Andrew McCarthy with us today. We'll chat with Andrew in just a second, but first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So, Andrew McCarthy is an award-winning travel writer, television director, and actor. He's appeared in over 24 films, including such iconic 80s movies as Pretty in Pink and St. Elmo's Fire. His recent documentary, BRATS, debuted at #1 on Hulu. He's directed nearly 100 hours of television, including Orange is the New Black and The Blacklist. Andrew's also been named Travel Journalist of the Year by the Society of American Travel Writers, and for a dozen years served as an editor-at-large at National Geographic Traveler magazine. He is the author of 4 New York Times best-selling books, including, most recently, Walking with Sam. We're going to chat with Andrew about his life and career, and of course, his documentary, Brats, which he directed and produced. It's a poignant, captivating journey through this pivotal era of his life as a member of the legendary Brat Pack. The film includes interviews with former castmates, producers, and other key figures associated with the beloved 1980s coming-of-age films, which include The Breakfast Club, St. Elmo's Fire, Pretty in Pink, and Mannequin. Andrew, welcome into the back room.
Thanks. Good to be with you.
Such an honor to have you here. I've been watching your work for I don't even want to say how long, because I think it ages us both, but I'm a big fan. So we have so much to chat about, but I want to start out with your success as an award-winning travel writer, which I suspect is not what most people know you for. How and when did that become such a meaningful part of your life and work?
Well, after I was young and successful in a certain way, I went and started traveling the world alone a lot. And I found it a really transformative experience, and it changed my life and my place in the world. And I would always go alone, and I'd always go for a long time, and I'd get out of touch. And I started writing stuff down because and eventually I was a really bad journal keeper, like, oh, the food's bad, I'm so lonely. And I realized that I was not a good journaler. So I started writing stories about people I met and what happened to me while I was, and then I had no intention of doing anything with it until, and this went on for a decade or so, until one day I did have an intention of doing something. And I met an editor of a magazine and said, you ought to let me write for your magazine. And he said, you're an actor, dude. And I said, yeah, but I can tell a story. That's what I do. And he thought that was the answer. So I started travel writing, and it was at a time and I started travel writing for good publications because I knew, from having been sort of labeled in the Brat Pack, I knew that I'd lost control of the narrative, my own narrative, very quickly with that. And I knew I didn't want that to happen. So writing you do very much by email and stuff, particularly with magazines. So people didn't know who I was. I was just a rando dude who sent them pitches. And so I started writing for good publications, New York Times, National Geographic Traveler, The Atlantic, places that I knew that by the time I was outed for being that Brat Pack dude, I would have not been so easy to dismiss, because they go, oh, he's out there, thinks he can write. Oh, wait, he writes for the Times and The Atlantic and National Geo. And, so, and it was really meaningful and important to me. And so it gave me a new birth of creativity when I felt sort of washed up in creatively in Hollywood, and it really changed my life in a wonderful way. And I did it totally the way I began acting, totally for fun and for free. And it took on a life of its own. And I knew I was good at it and I'm good at it for 2 reasons, because I knew inherently what I mentioned before, just to tell a story. Don't sell me a destination, tell me a story. And I also, no one loved doing it more than I did. My love for doing it was underneath everything. That it was just so apparent without you knowing that. It was a joy. And I'm like, this is important. This is meaningful. This will change your life. It changed mine. Go. And I never wrote about that, but that was sort of the impetus under everything. So combination of those 2 things and my strong desire to want to do it. And it was great. Like I said, it fueled me creatively in a way that I was early on in acting, and I stopped being.
Mm-hmm. And you've written several books, and your latest is Walking with Sam, which is about your 500-mile trek across Spain with your son. What was the impetus for the book in particular? And what are a couple of highlights from this incredible walk that you can share with us?
I walked it 25, 28, and 30 years ago now, alone, and it was real life-changing. It was a life-changing experience for me. As it is, I think anyone who walks the Camino de Santiago, they come back to change in a good way. And I always tell people, I've told so many friends who are at a moment of transition or whatever in their life or uncertainty and upheaval, I'd say, just go walk the Camino, dude. I'm like, what? And invariably they come back and go, that was the best thing I've ever done. And I would say it's the best thing I've ever done twice. And my son was 19. He was just sort of, going out on his own in the world. And my relationship with my father pretty much ended the minute I left home at 17. And with all my heart, I didn't want that to happen with my son. So I said, he had just gotten broken. His girlfriend had just broken up with him. He's moping around the house, and I knew he was vulnerable. So I just said, hey, you want to go walk across Spain? And he was like, yeah, whatever. And so, he's 19. His girlfriend dumped him. He was, so 2 days later, I knew that he would in a few days be fine. So like 2 days, I literally went from him going, yeah, whatever, to my computer, bought 2 plane tickets. And 2 days later, we were in Spain walking across the country.
That's amazing.
And I wanted to be able to, I wanted to transition our relationship from parent-child, dominant, submissive, or dominant rebellion to adults. And I didn't know how to do that because I didn't have that with my dad. And so I wanted to begin to do that. And I think that's what our walk ultimately did for us. I mean, it was a challenge on a day-to-day basis of getting the kid out of bed. I'm old, and so I want to leave at 6 a.m. He's 20 years old. He wants to sleep till the crack of noon. Right. So, I mean, we had our daily bouts. I mean, at one point I said, Sammy, I'm really sorry we've argued so much on this trip. And he said, what are you talking about? I think we argued twice. And I was like, wow, okay. Me, it was like, get out of bed, come on. So, perspective is everything. But it was a real life changer again. And so I wrote a book about it to get even more, because when you walk to Santiago de Compostela, it's about 50 miles from the sea. And a lot of pilgrims and people who walk the Camino feel an urge to walk to Finisterre, which is on the coast, which is beyond the actual end of the pilgrimage, which ends at the cathedral in Santiago de Compostela. And a lot of pilgrims do that. And I have no desire to do that. I didn't do it the first time. I had no desire to do it the second time. If I make it to Santiago, I'm stopping. And my son said, let's walk to Finisterre, to the sea, 2 more days of walking. And I'm like, no. But he said, well, I'm doing it. And I knew in that instant I had a book, because it's like, what does any parent want but our children to go on and succeed us and do better than we did and move beyond what we did. And so the low-hanging fruit of that sheep metaphor was too much for me. So I just said, we went there together, and then he went beyond what my accomplishments. And so then he could, he brags to all his friends, my dad walked across most of Spain. I walked across all of Spain.
Yeah.
Which feels great to hear. So anyway.
And were you able together to sort of broach the relationship that you had with your dad during this trip? Like, did you guys visit that at all as part of this journey?
We visited, you're walking together for 500 miles. You got a lot of time on your hands. And we talked about we talked about a couple of things that I didn't realize were still so potent for him. I was divorced from his mom when he was 2. And he's went perfectly, back and forth all his youth, and and it always seemed, those, transition days seemed a little wonky sometimes, but I didn't realize how much of that he still carried, and to talk about that. And I didn't realize my son was like me, and said I was terrible at school. I didn't fit in school, and I didn't like school. And my son was similar, but more so. And I didn't realize how much, hurt he still carried from the school experience. And so we talked about that a lot. We talked about my early fame and all that and the repercussions of that. We talked about my relationship with my dad. Sure, it was all on the table. I mean, that was the point of the thing, was that it's just be on the table, And one of the things that I've realized on that trip, realized that, I wanted to know who he was. But to do that, I had to let him see who I was. And as parents, in some degree, we want to keep our, that. I don't want to tell them, I don't want to burden my kids with my whatever. It's like, no, I'm really scared about this, Sam. I'm really anxious about this. And that's been invaluable to be able to say that, as opposed to, I got it. No, good, and just keeping it about him. But, so letting him see who I was, I think, more for him, according to him, more valuable than me listening to him.
As someone who has been raised by wolves. I'm always fascinated by other people's family dysfunction. So I'm curious if you want to share, like, what was it about your relationship with your dad that made it so complicated at such an early stage of your life?
Well, I mean, I can say it now because when I didn't really have an adult relationship with my dad very much at all. And, well, I can back up again. So my dad was a very volatile guy, very angry guy.
Mm-hmm.
And so he had an explosive temper, and I was an oversensitive kid.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a good combination, And I always felt like my dad didn't like me. And maybe that was true, maybe it wasn't. But the experience of it was that. And I was terrified of him. And then when I became successful in the movies at a very young age, when the world was sort of coming at me in this wonderful, exciting, and scary way, I didn't feel I had support and backup, and then my dad, his fortunes were waning as mine were coming on. And so then he wanted money. And then that got really, ugly. And I gave him money for a time until I didn't give him money. And then that was even uglier. And then, so we had a very, and then as he was late in life when he was dying, my wife said, you need to go see your dad. And I was like, yeah, you're right. And it was a beautiful thing to go spend time with him the last week of his life and stay with him for that time. And, I like to say we didn't solve our past, but we just put it down. Well, it just didn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
He was there, he was dying, and I'm here with you. And that's the deal.
Yeah.
When I saw, at one point he sort of lunged up in this O'Neillian moment of like lunging for my neck, from the bed. I was like, wow. And I jump back and I go, wow, the dynamic is still there. But what I really saw was so much fear in his eyes. I saw so much fear, which wasn't masked by anger anymore because he didn't have the strength anymore, And I so identified with that fear. I've been a very fearful person in so many areas of my life and had to walk through fear so often that once I really understood that and saw that in him, I was able to. None of it mattered anymore. It was all fine. It was my dad, and I loved it.
Well, the relationship with our parents is so profound and so impactful, and especially men with their fathers, which is why your trip with your son Sam is so amazing and so important that you guys got a chance to do that. I can't imagine ever going anywhere with my father for more than an hour.
Oh my God. I never in a million years that happened. I'm writing a book now about male friendship, where I was sitting at the kitchen table with Sam, and he was talking about one of his friends, and he said, you don't really have any friends, do you, Dad? And he didn't mean it he's a 20-year-old kid, so he just says the way kids say that. And I said, Sam, I do. I just don't see them, but I know they're there, and that's enough. And I believed that when I said it. He laughed and went off to see his friends. And I sat there and I thought, you know what? That's not enough. I had these profound friendships when I was young, and they all moved away, through life. They moved to different parts of the country. And I thought, I'm going to go see my friends because I don't, I like to tell myself that my life is full enough with my work and my family and my kids and my wife, and I got enough going on. But I took a cross-country road trip to 10,000 miles to go see my old friends, and also met men along the way and discussed the idea of male friendship with men. I met blues musicians in Mississippi, cops in Ohio, cowboys in Wyoming, and I just randomly talked to these 100 men and sort of on their experience of male friendship. And it's a really interesting topic because men are lousy at friendship and it's getting worse. And anyway, so it was a profound experience for me to sort of rekindle that and to commit to that idea of friendship and what the value it has in our lives. Anyway, I digress.
No, that's a great subject. So congrats on the release of Brats. I loved every minute of this documentary, and I do want to get into it with you shortly. But first, let's go back in time a little bit. You grew up in Jersey. How would you describe yourself as a kid? I'm always fascinated to learn how people were in even like the single digits, because quite often when we start talking about it, it shows who they've become later on in life. So performing, writing, all the things that you've done in your career, were they a part of who you were as a little kid? Were they interesting to you at all? And when did you start tapping that kind of stuff?
Well, I didn't write anything until I was in my 30s.
Wow.
And didn't eat anything until I was in my 30s. And when I was a kid, I was a little guy, I grew up in suburban Westfield, New Jersey, which was, perfectly fine, 3-bedroom colonial house and, be home at 6 for dinner kind of life, basketball in driveways and, sneaking peeks at Playboy magazines in wood panel basements. You know what I mean? That was
What?
my upbringing. And it was perfectly fine. I didn't, but you always think that about your upbringing. Your upbringing's your upbringing, so you don't have anything to compare it to. So, but it was fine, And then when I was 15, I was cut from the high school basketball team. And my mother said, "Why don't you try out for the play, dear?" I was like, "I don't need a play. I want to be the point guard." I mean, what? And anyway, I tried out for the play, and I was, guess, as the Artful Dodger in Oliver. And that was life-changing. I walked out on stage, and it was like that Tennessee Williams line he talks about, like, love. I think he was talking about love, and he said it's as if a room that had always been half in shadow was suddenly in the light. And that's what I felt like. I felt like, oh my God, there I am. There I am. And I knew it was profound and important to me because I told no one. I knew it was mine. And it was like a little flame that gets lit, right? And it's like anybody could have walked by at that moment and just blown it out. When I eventually did tell my parents I wanted to be an actor and go to college to study acting, my father's response was, "No son of mine's going to be a fucking thespian." And so I guess I was right. And
at least he knew what thespian was. I'm impressed that he knew what thespian was.
Well, I didn't, but I think the implication of that is queer.
My dad would have said lesbian, actually.
Yeah, well, I mean, all that, I didn't know what thespian was when he said it. So it was all that implication, like the deviant. You're going to be a deviant.
Wow.
Basically. So anyway. And then when I got cast in a movie opposite Jacqueline Bisset, he was like, "Bring Jackie home for dinner."
Yeah. Well, I want to talk to you about that in a second. But so you enrolled in NYU. You were there for 2 years, and then I think you got thrown out. I'm curious to know what you did or what you didn't do to achieve that honor.
I was in the drama program, which meant in the undergraduate drama at NYU is you went to acting school 3 days a week, and then Tuesday and Thursday you went to like regular school. And I couldn't have cared less about the regular school, so I just didn't go. I went to all the acting stuff. I never went to the other stuff. And so after 2 years, they kind of, said, "Well, struggle on without you here, Andy." I didn't really even notice that I'd gotten kicked out. I don't know where I was and what I was doing. I mean, I used to smoke a lot of pot and throw Frisbee in Washington Square Park. I mean, that's what I did. And I would go to the Revival House movie houses that no longer exist and watch days. I would just sit there all day and watch double features of old Montgomery Clifton, Marlon Brando, Jimmy Stewart movies. And I really learned a lot in the dark of, watching those double features on Thalia and the Hollywood and 8th Street Playhouse and all those places that don't exist anymore. And that was a real education to me.
Mm-hmm.
And and then there was a friend of mine called me up. I didn't know how I was going to tell my parents I got kicked out of school. And so a friend called me up and said there's casting for an open call for a movie, meaning anyone can audition. They're looking for somebody 18, vulnerable and sensitive. And I was like, "Dude, it's me." So I went up to the Anstonia Hotel on 73rd Street when there were 500 other 18 vulnerable, sensitive kids there. And I waited in the line, waited in the hallway for hours and went in and met some guy. He looked at me and kind of said, "Come back tomorrow." And so I went back, and 10 auditions later, I was doing love scenes in an elevator with Jacqueline Bisset.
Yeah, so this was Class, the film. I think it was 1983. It was your first big break. You play a prep school kid who ends up sleeping with your friend's mom, the 40-year-old Jackie Bisset, who, by the way, was perhaps the most beautiful woman in the world at that time, in my opinion. So way to break into Hollywood.
I should have quit right there. It was all downhill after that. I mean, it was absolute. I had such a great, and after the movie finished, Jackie, and who was so wonderful and kind and gracious to me and generous, like I was just like, I didn't know anything. And she said, "Andrew, what are you doing after the film?" I'm like, "Oh, I don't know. I have to go to Los Angeles to get an agent." She goes, "Where are you staying?" I'm like, "I don't know." She goes, "You'll stay with me." I'm like, "Okay." So I live in Jacqueline.
We could just end the interview right now and just continue with that story, as far as I'm concerned.
I lived at her house for like 2 months. I went out to LA, and she lived up in Bend Canyon. She lived with Alexander Godunov, who was this Russian ballet star who just defected. And they were this gorgeous couple. And I was this kid, and I used to just sit there and smoke cigarettes and drink Alexander's homemade Russian vodka. And I'd count while he would do his jumping jacks or his jump rope. I would time his jump rope. And Jackie would walk in the morning with her robe, her cherry cloth robe on. She goes, "Good morning, Andrew. Eggs?" I'm like, yeah, sure. And Jack used to drive me sometimes to my auditions. And like, I remember I was meeting an agent one time and he said, asked that movie and he's asking about Jack. And I said, yeah, she's actually outside right now. She gave me a ride. And he said, what? So he got out of the chair, he went out and looked out the window and Jackie was just sitting down there in her Cadillac convertible, just sitting there waiting for me to finish my meeting. His jaw just dropped. I had the wonderful naivete of not knowing any of this although I did know at the time, there was this wondrous, Jack used to have these dinner parties and like, oh, there's Louis Malle and Candice Bergen and all these people.
Wow.
Pass the salt. It was incredible.
I would imagine that in 1983, staying at Jacqueline Bisset's house, the answer to any question she would ask is yes. Just blanket yes. Do whatever you want, yes.
Whatever you want.
Yeah. Some people refer to Francis Ford Coppola's The Outsiders in 1983 as the first Brat Pack film. It had an amazing cast that included Matt Dillon, Tom Cruise, Patrick Swayze. But I think most people considered, The Breakfast Club and St. Elmo's Fire, which the latter you were in, as the official start of that era. What's your take on that?
I'd agree with that. I mean, yeah, that was the start. But sure, I think those two movies are the epicenter of Brat Pack. And it was right around then that the article came out that coined the phrase. So, I guess you can look back and go, sure, Francis, The Outsiders was, but not really, I don't think. I mean, it's a terrific movie, and it was at the beginning of sort of youth culture taking over. That was certainly happening then. But, yeah, I'd say.
And was it easy for you at that point to get cast in St. Elmo's Fire? Or is that a bit of a challenging process?
That happened because I auditioned a year or two before for a movie that Joel Schumacher was doing called DC Cab, which was a vehicle for Mr. T. And
my mama didn't raise no dummy.
And I auditioned for that, and I didn't get the job. And he remembered me, and so when he was casting films, he asked me to come in and read, and I did. And I immediately was his choice for the part. And then they said, okay, you need to now come out to LA and, talk to, impress the studio people. And we're going to bring you into Columbia here. You're going to sit down and bring you up to the studio executive, and you're going to sit on the couch, be charming for 15 minutes. And I was like, okay, I didn't know how to do that. So I was terrified. So I just went and, I remember they sent a limousine to pick me up. They got me at the Chateau Marmont. And they sent a limousine to drive me over the hill at the studio. And I sat there like a bump on a log. I didn't understand how to be like, winning and impressive and charming. I was just scared and comfortable. And this executive looking at me, and he's looking at me, and Joel's sitting on the couch going, come on. And anyway, the meeting is a flop, and I'm leaving. And I remember Joel said, my assistant will drive you home. And he was in his Volkswagen Beetle. So I arrived in a stretch limousine. I drove home in a Volkswagen Bug. And on the way home, back across the hill, I realized, oh my God, I blew this. I was supposed to, I'm so dumb. So I told the assistant, oh my God, I want to do this movie so bad. Because I was so fearful and things. My go-to response was always sort of this nonchalance and indifference. So it made you seem like I didn't care about stuff so I wouldn't be vulnerable, so I would just seem like I didn't care about it, And so I professed my passion for this part to the assistant. And he, to his credit, went back to Joel and told him all this. And Joel called me up and said, you jerk. I just, and he fought for me and got me the part,
And during shooting, did you have any sense that you were involved in something that would become part of such a cultural phenomenon? Or was it just you show up, you got a paycheck, it was a job?
Well, there was never showing up and getting a paycheck back in those days. It was all so exciting, and paychecks weren't that good. So I mean, it was more. It wasn't about that, but it was. I knew in that movie, some of those other people were already much more successful than I was, and so I knew it was a great part for me at that time. I was, that rotten before it's ripe cynicism covering a well of vulnerability was like, that's me, and I had a very specific idea of what I wanted to look like, wardrobe, and I modeled them on a friend of mine, and Joel was game to let me do all that, wear the big trench coat, over camel-haired overcoat and all that kind of stuff. And so I knew it was my opportunity, and that it was a big deal. It was a big deal in my life. And I knew it it was this or not, this or bust kind of. I'd been in a couple movies that had been not successful, and so that was life changing, career changing for sure. And then I did pretty right after that.
So your acting encompasses film, TV, and theater. How are each of those distinctly gratifying to you? What do you love about performing in each?
Well, TV and movies are kind of the same, except TV's faster, which I prefer. I prefer to move quickly. I haven't done theater in a long time. I used to do a lot of theater. And, the happiest times of my life were always when I was in a play. And I don't know why I don't do them anymore. I think I've lost the nerve, frankly. But I mean, anytime I would do a play, the first day of performance, I would just say, I don't care how good this gets. I'm never, ever going to do this to myself again. I get so much anxiety about it.
What is it the root of that? Is it just like having to just do it live and memorize all that stuff?
That's a good question. I mean, it's sort of like, I don't know. I think fear feeds on itself, and anxiety feeds on itself at a certain point. And then you just sort of talk yourself into this is how it is. And this is how you are. This is how you respond to these situations. And I think, a lot of it isn't real, but it feels real. And so, but I'd say the happiest times in my life are when I've been in a play and movies. And, there's something I love learning to be a professional in the movies. I remember I did a movie called Catholic Boys. It was called Heaven Help Us. That changed the title. And it's the second movie I did. And I really learned to become a professional during that movie. And I loved learning about the lenses and the camera and, the dynamic of film and all the different people. I loved as a young guy learning how to fit into that and learn that. And I loved the old school guys back then who would love to teach you that stuff, And it was a different time, of course, like I remember looking through the camera and then this guy Miroslav Ondrejček was the DP and he walked with a limp, he had a cane, and I just whacked the back of my knees, buckled and fell to the ground because you'd never look through my camera unless I give you permission. And, today he would have been fired at lunch as abusive. But, then I just went, oh, my God, I learned a valuable lesson.
Yeah, bet you never look in that camera again.
And just respect there's a process, respect him. It's his thing, all that stuff. And I felt so honored to be like learning. I loved that feeling. And I felt like my life was beginning to happen. And so I've always loved the process of how the sausage gets made. And I guess that's one of the reasons I became. And I've always hung out more with the crew than I did with actors, so I just liked that aspect.
All right, so let's talk about Brats. You alluded before to getting in a car and traveling thousands of miles and rekindling or exploring past friendships. What moved you to make this documentary after all these years, apart from perhaps that reason?
Well, I wrote a memoir about at that time. Called Brat, oddly enough, an 80s story. And I wrote it, I wrote a book about my experience in the Brat Pack, which is, having been the most seminal experience of my career and one of the largest ones of my life, I'd never really looked at it. It was just something I kind of ran from for so long. And so I thought I would look at that. And so I wrote this book and looking at it, and I realized what actually what a blessing it was. And the greatest thing that ever happened to me in a certain way, career-wise, in many ways, was that. Whereas I hated it so much when I was young. We all hated it and thought it was very limiting. And so anyway, the movie is about, really how. So I went back and I revisited everyone. And so when I finished the book, I thought, oh, this is how I feel. I wonder how everybody else feels, because I'd never talked to any of those guys since then. We all sort of scattered once that happened. And so I thought that might be interesting. And the movie's about really, it's not really about the Brat Pack. To me, it's about time and age and how we view events of our lives. And over time, we come to view them very differently than I'm 180 degrees different perception and perspective on my youth and that time in my youth than I did then. What felt like this terrible, stigmatizing, confining label, which it was to a large degree, has become the greatest sort of professional blessing in my life. Is a really interesting journey to take. Because I was interested in that. I was interested in that. And anyway, so I thought it would be interesting too to talk to the other guys and see what their experience of it was. And I always knew the biggest challenge of it would be getting people to say yes to do it, because so many people still find it traumatic or whatever. And then the fact that I'd written this book about it, I was no longer and it's mercy. I came to realize that, people come up to me and I'm the avatar of their youth. And so are other members of the Brat Pack. They come up to me and go, oh my God, those movies. And they start talking. And they're, like I say in the documentary, I think they're rough. Their eyes glaze over and they're not talking to me anymore. They're talking to themselves when they were 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, when you're just blossoming into life and your life is a blank slate to be written upon. And it's the most thrilling, wondrous time in life. And I represent that, me and other members of Brat Pack, to people. And the gift I can give them is just by receiving them when they say that. And that's an amazing kind of thing.
I think the fascination is so huge because we as viewers in some ways see ourselves in one of those characters. Is that part of the reason why viewers love these movies so much and these characters?
Yeah, of course. I mean, absolutely. And, you have to put in some cultural context in the sense that, as you alluded to earlier with The Outsiders, movies weren't about young people until the early mid-'80s. They were about, in the 70s, the auteurs had taken over, and all these, The Godfather and French Connection, all these kind of adult entertainment. And at some point, Hollywood kind of realized, oh, wait a minute. Kids go to the movies 5, 6 times. Grown-ups go once. Let's make movies about kids. And that didn't happen until the 80s. And then we were right at the forefront of that and at the vanguard, the center of that. And so it's impossible to sort of realize now because everything is still geared toward an adolescent mentality. But it wasn't like that then. And we were at the beginning of that. And we were like, the ones who were out in front of the pack. The Brat Pack were out in front of everybody. And we were the faces of that. And the generation for a certain generation, we just represent, people felt seen for the first time in movies. It's like, that's me. That's, Emilio's me, or she's me, or,
Right.
Allie's me. Like you're talking about the people, and John in Breakfast Club, which is the best one of those movies, I think, just wrote archetypes, really. And he was good enough to cast really well people that inhabited those archetypes. So go back to what you were saying. Yeah, you see yourself in, the loner, the bad boy Judd, or you see yourself in the queen and Molly, or the freak in, Allie, and, that kind of stuff. So people could just identify. And then those movies just sort of tumbled after that.
So these movies had, in your opinion, a huge impact on filmmaking, the business of filmmaking.
Yeah. I mean, those movies changed the way Hollywood and who Hollywood made movies for. I mean, movies are still made for. What are all the Marvel movies? They're adolescent movies. I mean, flying and all this, it's ridiculous. It's for adolescent mentality, all of them. And very rarely do you get like good adult, and that's still the epicenter of, and that wasn't the case till then. And so it began all that. And which I didn't realize as much until I started making the movie, actually, how transformative those movies were.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're not the greatest movies in the world, God knows, but they were there. They were the ones that helped usher in this new thing. And that's why that generation still 40 years later still holds them near and dear,
So you've directed a lot of TV, including Orange is the New Black and The Blacklist. How different an experience as a director was directing this documentary versus television?
Well, nothing exists here in a documentary. You're just going to kind of go and see what happens. And I'm also the subject of it, I don't really like to think people, I didn't want to be the subject, but the conduit through which you enter into this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, one of the challenges of the movie, with a movie like Brat Pack movie, is everyone thinks they know what it should be because everyone had their, I'm talking about of the generation that it's of interest to. Everyone had their own experience of it and they want it to be a certain way. And they also didn't want to hear, oh, you guys hated this? No, this was amazing. You were it. We wanted to be you. Don't tell me you didn't like it. So no one wants their fantasies messed with, So that was one of the, to which I kind of didn't care. I thought if I was going to make this, I wanted to sort of say, this was the experience of this. And like I say, everyone could substitute something in their life where they felt they weren't seen and that it affected their life in a way. And because I was in the Brat Pack, I could make a movie about that. If your other people's whatever where that happened, it was a big seminal event in their life and it wasn't necessarily a positive one. Hopefully they can just sort of plug their own, went into that. And then look back later and go, oh my God, yeah, that was, I got cut from the high school basketball team at 15. I thought it was the worst thing that ever happened to me. And then if that didn't happen, I never would have become an actor, which gave me life. So, you know what I mean? And so everyone has events like that. The Brat Pack just happens to be the one that I could make a movie about because people pay for it. That makes any sense.
Sure. You mentioned being the subject of the film. I made a documentary about my late wife, and I was the subject of the film. But I went through a process where I had to just, be very careful about the balance of how much Andy they see. How much time did you spend going through that same thought process of how much people are going to see you?
You're smarter than me. The rap on the movie, if it gets a rap, it's just too much. It's not the movie they wanted. We wanted this movie, And certain people would tell me, I tried to cut me out. Is the problem is I'm the conduit. You're traveling with me to go do this stuff.
Exactly. Sure.
And at a certain point, some people thought it was too much. Some people, people I was working with said, no, we need more personal from you. And I'm like, there's a lot of Andy in here. Okay, we don't need any more. So get the balance right. Some people would say yes. Some people would say no. That certainly is the challenge. I'd be curious to know what your experience of that was.
Well, I think you're alluding to the fact that there is no right answer. You can't open a book and go, what is the right balance? It's just, I guess, in my case, I felt as the director of the film, it's whatever my vision was. That's the right balance. I was making a movie about someone who had passed. I didn't really want it to be about me. The point of the film was to bring her back to life. But yet, like you in this film, you are the spine of that film. You're taking people with you in that car on this journey. For me, it was just about whatever I felt intuitively was the right mix. So whenever I would see myself too much, I'd be like, that's got to go. This has got to go. There's just too much of me. This isn't about me. But in some ways it was. And then the correspondence I got from people after who watched it, to them, like to your point, to some people, it was all about me. They were so engrossed in my grief journey and my process, and they may not have even known who my late wife was. They were there for me. And then there were the other people who were huge fans of my wife. And so for them, it was just me taking people on this journey together so that they can explore her life more and who she was as a person. So for me, it was intuition, because it's hard to map any of that stuff out.
Yeah, I think that's really well put. That's exactly my experience. And there are times when I say, let's get a different clip here, but with that I'm not in, please, can we just use it? There was a moment when they're talking about class in John Hughes, how he dealt with class relations and upper class, and and there was a wonderful scene with me and Molly Ringwald where that whole movie was about class. But I said, yeah, that's the appropriate scene here, but enough of me. Let's use some kind of wonderful where it's just, and we'll get Eric Stoltz to do it because it's like enough Andy. But I certainly had that. But I think what you said is exactly, and then it was all just a field game. And I did say, people, if you didn't like the movie, it's on me. No one told me, no one made me do anything. This is a movie I made and I wanted to make, and I wanted to make it about, I know people, I could have sat back with, my dry martini and kind of, the Brat Pack, man, back in the day. I told some, and that's not the experience. It wouldn't have been truthful. The experience was this, we felt blindsided by this fucking thing. And it derailed our careers to a very large degree, and certainly altered the trajectory of them. It didn't ruin our careers. It didn't do anything. It just altered the trajectory of how we were seen and perceived. And all anyone ever wants in life is see me, see who I am. And we suddenly felt seen. And so I was going to talk about that. And then how, again, what I was talking about before, how that's changed over time to realize, oh my God, what a blessing that was. And so that was the bigger picture, again, was me interested as an old guy now, at 60 years old, interested in how time changes my experience of life. And so, but yeah, it's all me, the mistakes in it, and it's all mine to do it. No one else.
The thing that I think you did really, really well, when I watched the film, I felt your vulnerability so much. When you started out on that trip after not seeing some of these people for 30 years, which, by the way, was a surprise to me. I guess like most people think you guys hung out all the time, and you didn't. Yeah. But you were really letting yourself be put out there. to revisit your past and these people that you, at one point, shared something incredible with, highs and lows. And that vulnerability comes through very, very clear. And I think that's what makes the film really great.
Oh, well, that's nice. I mean, that, thank you. I'm glad. Again, that's what some people were turned off by. But I think it's like when you're writing, it's like if you're not going to come clean on the page, then you can't ask people to invest their time if you're not going to be truthful. And, you want people, if they're reading and or watching, just start nodding their heads going, yeah, I feel that way. I wasn't in the Brat Pack, wasn't in the movie, but I felt suddenly like something happened in my life and I wasn't seen anymore. That's how I felt. You know what I mean? So then all you want to do is create an identification. You can't do that if you're going to sit back and be cool and, safe. So, yeah, I mean, I think that, and I was that way. I was very actively trying to, like, this is what I felt.
The film is obviously a very deeply personal trip for you throughout your life as a member of the Brat Pack. Was there something you learned in both researching and making the film that really surprised you about that era, or the other actors, or even yourself?
I'm sure there is. It's I don't know how to answer. I mean, it was all kind of a surprise, and none of it was a surprise. I wish I had a good answer for that, because the answer should be, of course, and you have this wonderful pithy thing. It was just a relief in a certain way to see these people again, and to feel the biggest surprise for me was how much affection I had for everyone, and we all see that for each other. I was shocked with it because we did not, Rob and I did not get along with our kids. We were competitive, and we were like, he's an LA hotshot kid. Back in the day, if you lived in New York, you want to be a New York actor, which was a very different thing than an LA actor. We were competitive young people, and there was only so many pieces of the pie, and we're all competing for them. And so I was surprised how much I just felt so nice to see everyone again. Now they're sort of old, it doesn't matter. None of that matters. And we were, we went through it together. We could just look at each other. Like I think I said, Allie, at one point or two, I just look at you and I go, oh, hello. And you just know. And that's nice. And to feel not alone and isolated in that. And that, like it wasn't it's a Brat Pack. We're not curing cancer, like we say, but it was a profound effect on our lives. And reception that you have and other people had was very different than what it felt on the inside, and being a part of it. And so that's even weird. If millions of people perceive this one thing, and on the inside you're going, that ain't what this feels like at all. You feel that's a weird thing. And it wasn't, again, it's not important, except, it's one's life, and one's life is important,
One of the pivotal characters you alluded to before in the film is a New York Magazine writer who coined the Brat Pack name. And it's just so astounding to me that there can be one singular person that can have such profound impact on our life and our career, and not necessarily in a positive way. 2 words, right? 2 words that literally impacted you guys so deeply.
It's, again, kind of impossible to fathom now. Like, it was one magazine article in one, came out for 1 week. And people would say, oh, could you imagine social media around that then? What would have gone? I'm like, no, it wouldn't have happened if social media was around. You could have got back on your thing and pushed back right away to it. And there's so many, you were so distracted with so many things. And it was June 9th before it came out. And then there was June 10th when it came out, and it just turned a page. And if I'd walked into an office on June 9th, people would go, Andy, sit down, please, sit down. So glad you're here. On June 10th, have a seat. Sorry to keep you waiting. And the perception and the attitude toward us, because there's nothing like, taking people down. And it was a takedown, And so sitting down and talking to David after all these decades, he'd never spoken to any of us before. And when I called him up and I asked him if I could talk to him for the movie, he said, what's your agenda? What do you want? And I said, you mean, am I going to do to you what you did to us? No, I just want to hear you. I didn't say that in so many words because he would have hung up on me. But I just wanted to hear your experience of it. And it's true. It's all I wanted. What's your experience with it? Because it changed his life like it changed mine. I think I cut it from I always said, you're kind of like the fifth Beatle. You know what I
Right.
mean? It altered his career, and not in the best way. And, he certainly never interviewed a celebrity again. Nobody would talk to him after that. Uh, but you realize he was just a young kid trying to make a name for himself. And was he a little jealous? Yeah, maybe, you know? So it just, it's what happened. But it was fascinating to talk to him and get his sort of take on it, because on one hand, first of all, no one keeps tighter track of all of our careers than David Blum does. He knows everything that everyone has ever done since then. You must have Google words about everybody or something. So he feels a certain, if not responsibility, I wouldn't speak for him, but a certain connection to us, and so I really liked getting to sit down with him and meet him.
Yeah, it's a riveting element of the film. He as a person, how he approached it, how he looks back on it, your interaction with him, and just the whole thing is just, I think, a terrific part of the film.
Yeah, I think that's the heart of the movie, really. But I enjoyed that interview. And I remember when we were doing it, it started thundering and lightning out, and it was just sort of like, oh my God, it got really dark in the room, and it's like, oh my God, it's kind of funny. It was also, that was really interesting, going to everybody's house to go talk to them. You know what I mean? I'm going to come over with the camera and like talk to you. Are you okay? That I don't have any. One of the people, I forget who, said, "What, do you want to send me a list of questions first?" And I go, "Well, I don't have any questions. I'm just going to come talk to you about. If we don't have something to talk about, then really, I mean." And that was really interesting. And I remember Ali was like, I didn't want anyone else in the room, so it was like, well, I got a camera and the sound guy. There were like 4 of us out. He goes, "No, we don't want anyone else there." I'm like, oh my God. And I'm a total Luddite, so I'm up there setting up the cameras myself and the sound, and I forgot to turn on the microphones, and luckily the audio from the cameras picked it up, and it's all just a mess. But it was a really sensitive topic to some people, and I get that.
I'm going to play armchair psychiatrist for a second. It feels like your choice of Brats as the film's title is you coming to terms with and accepting the role this brand has had on your life and career. Any truth to that?
Of course. Yeah. I mean, I think it's just sort of reclaiming it, and sort of, it's provocative, and it's sort of reclaiming it. And like that, if there's an obituary for me, it's in the first sentence.
Right.
So
it's not going to be, "Here lies a great travel writer."
Yeah, no, exactly. So yeah, it's sort of a reclaiming it. It's sort of a in your face. It's sort of all that, and I didn't know what to call the movie. I mean, when I wrote the book, that was called Brat, an 80s story, I had a different title, and a friend of mine read the book, and he said, "What are you going to call it?" And I said the title, and he goes, "No, there's only one name for this book." Because it's called Brat. And I said, "Fuck you. This book will never be called Brat." And I knew in that instant that I hadn't done my work and come to terms with this. And I went back and rewrote the last third of the book, and did a lot of sort of thinking about, like, wait a minute, no, that's it, And so I owe him a great debt. And so when the movie came, we didn't have a title at all. And so with somebody, we just said we had to send it to the studio, and we need to put a title on this thing, Andrew. I did Brats. And then they loved it. And I was like, oh, I guess that's the title. Okay.
Sure. It's perfect. I can't imagine it being anything else.
I can't either.
What do you hope audiences take away from the film and Andrew McCarthy as a human being?
Well, I wouldn't have any idea what they think of me. But again, I think what people would take with it is that they would nod their head and go, "Oh, that's not what I thought at all." But I relate and identify in certain aspects of the emotions of that. I relate to the feelings of something happens in our life, and then years later we come to realize, oh, what a blessing that was. And wow. Just really, to me, because I turned 60 while I was making the movie, and so that's the beginning of being old, right? And I really had a reevaluation of like what is important in life and what matters and things. And so looking back, you look back on these things and to come to terms with it in a whole different way was very liberating.
I think you're right. That's what I took away from the film. It was just a lot of, oh, wow. I mean, I found myself seeing that over and over and over again. And I think that's what a great documentary does, is it enlightens people to a time or a person or a situation that they thought they knew about, and what they knew was only skimming the surface. So you did a great job with that. What's coming up next for you?
Well, I am finishing this book, or trying to, this friendship book. And so I've got to get that in. It's due next month. So I'm pounding the keys and trying to get that sorted.
So my last question, it's not anything related to any of this. It's a window into the soul question, and music is often a great window into the soul. So I want to know Andrew McCarthy's top 5 musical artists of all time, and I don't want Simple Minds on it.
You mean top 5 that I love, or top 5 like Desert Island kind of things?
Well, that's a good way to do it. Which 5 albums?
Bat Out of Hell, the Meatloaf record. Born to Run. Springsteen record. I grew up in Jersey, so I, came of age on Bruce Springsteen, and that's been an interesting relationship watching. Anyway, and Tunnel of Love, I think, is a great record that he did. And there's any number of Bob Dylan records that I would pick, and that's all I have for you.
I like them all. Andrew, this was really great. When you finish the book, please come back and talk to us about that, because that is a really important subject, especially in these turbulent times we're living in. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.
Alrighty, take care.
Bye.
This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg, and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Langell. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.